If you love spooky movies, devilishly delicious meals, creepy cocktails, and nostalgic movie facts, then you're in the right place. Hello and welcome to Pretty Spooky Presents Friday Night Feast and Fright, where we match our meal to our monsters. Each month I plan a pretty spooky dinner and movie to enjoy at home inside my home tiki bar, the Sunken Compass. Tonight's Feast and Fright, featuring Universal's 1935 classic, The Bride of Frankenstein, brings us to Mary Shelley's opulent Swiss villa, where we will enjoy pre-dinner Sparkling Necromancer cocktails and listen as she explains that her original Frankenstein tale didn't actually end and reveals the rest of the story. Then we'll retreat into the woods along with the monster to have an appetizer of Bavarian cheeses, sardines, and fresh berries. And we've been invited to supper by a kindly old hermit where we will dine in his warm and cozy cottage. He's serving velvet cod chowder with garden herbs and spiderweb cheesy bites. Then for dessert, we will climb the steep and jagged steps of Castle Frankenstein's laboratory tower with Dr. Pretorius and Henry Frankenstein to build a monstrous chocolatey tower surrounding a flaming smoky sip that will make you scream for more. I work out all of the details beforehand and share my low-carb on the high seas recipes in the video because they're so good, you'd torch your entire village just to get your hands on them. Now let's quickly get the Sparkling Necromancer cocktails going, gather around for story time at the Shelleys, and enjoy the feast. I hear there's an angry mob gathering by the old windmill again. The Necromancer cocktail is a riff on the Corpse Reviver, and because both contain gin, they're perfectly fitting for tonight's Feast and Fright, since Professor Pretorius claims it is his only weakness when toasting his partnership with Henry Frankenstein. And I've made the Corpse Reviver and my Sparkling Corpse Reviver 2.0 a few times in other episodes. So I've decided to reformulate the Necromancer to make it effervescently feminine for the bride, enhance the gin for Pretorius of course, and dial back the liqueurs to make it more low carb on the high seas. Today we'll be using 3/4 ounce lemon juice, 3/4 ounce gin, 1/2 ounce absinthe, 1/2 ounce elderflower liqueur, 1/2 ounce Lillet Blanc. Shake and double strain into a chilled coupe, top with a dry sparkling wine, and garnish with a lemon twist. And now we shall drink to our partnership, to a new world of gods and monsters. This Sparkling Necromancer cocktail goes very nicely with our rustic Woodland appetizer of Bavarian cheeses, sardines, and berries. Besides, we'll surely need the sustenance wandering through the woods, saving young shepherdesses and running from angry hunters. And just like the monster, director James Whale fought many battles to bring the Bride of Frankenstein to life. For starters, Whale never wanted to direct the sequel in the first place and hated the original script. Much like the resistant Frankenstein who didn't want to participate in another creation, Whale believed that one Frankenstein movie was plenty and a second creation would never compare. Luckily, Universal executives used persuasion tactics that would make Pretorius proud. Universal promised Whale that if he directed Bride of Frankenstein, Universal would approve his pet project, One More River, in which he'd pair up with actor Colin Clive and writer William Hurlbut yet again. After at least 5 rewrites with various writers, Whale held up his end of the bargain and began work on the projected 36-day shoot for The Bride of Frankenstein, with the same exact budget of the original Frankenstein of just under $300,000 or $7 million in the current economy. However, the project took 10 days longer and cost $100,000 more than planned. Considering current Universal movie budgets hover around an astounding $80 million and take 3 times as long to complete, Whale and his crew were truly godlike magicians. Whale continuously proved obstacles were no match to his drive and determination. He recognized his love of art early, but when World War I interrupted his studies, he enlisted in the British Army. After quickly rising to the rank of lieutenant, Whale became a prisoner of war until the war's end in 1918. Surprisingly, while imprisoned, he acted, wrote, produced, and designed sets in makeshift theatrical productions, which were a source of escapism, enjoyment, and relief. As a post-war civilian, Whale continued his artistic endeavors as a cartoon artist, a set designer, actor, and eventually as a director, making his way to Hollywood. Whale, who was both rebellious and courageous, refused to conform. His films, which outwardly provoked conventional societal standards and religious ideologies, were subsequently ripped apart by censorship boards in the US, England, China, and Japan. Trinidad, Palestine, and Hungary banned The Bride of Frankenstein completely, and Swiss censors demanded such drastic revisions that Universal gave up on ever screening it in Switzerland. Living as an openly gay man at this time came with its own set of challenges. Some have said that his lifestyle complicated his career, and others have said it had no bearing on his success either way, and that he was a respected artist who knew how to balance moments of great depth with flashes of campy humor. I've always found the mark of great literature and art of any form to be that of which many, many people from all walks of life can see themselves. And that is why so many of us connect deeply with a great work of art that is The Bride of Frankenstein. And there's nothing more comforting and cozy than a warm bowl of velvet cod chowder with garden herbs and spiderweb cheesy bites shared among friends. Soup, bread, friend, good. And speaking of friends, Whale called upon friends, former colleagues, and those he admired to help with his newest creation. Many of the actors were those he knew from his post-war theatrical endeavors in England. Among them were the bride, Elsa Lanchester, and Ernest Thesiger, who portrayed Professor Pretorius, as well as Una O'Connor, who played the boisterous maid Minnie. And once Whale had a good working relationship with actors, he liked to work with them again and again. Colin Clive was in 3 of Whale's films before Clive's early demise from tuberculosis at the young age of 37, which was further hastened by alcoholism. Una O'Connor was the innkeeper in The Invisible Man, where she proved to be such a standout that Whale cast her as Henry Frankenstein's maid, Minnie, where she added energy, humor, and that unmistakable voice. It was Una's distinctive scream in The Invisible Man that was recorded and reused in many other Universal films as a well-known sound effect. Whale loved Ernest Thesiger's ability to play unique, memorable, and campy villains. He was in Old Dark House, followed by The Bride of Frankenstein. It has been hypothesized that Thesiger's characters represented Whale and his persona. Boris Karloff was a struggling actor and a mere unknown when Whale spotted him in the Universal cafeteria and changed his life in 1931 by casting him as the monster in Frankenstein, The Old Dark House in 1932, and The Bride of Frankenstein in 1935. In his best suit and feeling dapper, Karloff admitted that the casting was a bit injurious to his ego, since he thought he was looking more like a leading man than a leading monster. Boris Karloff was the more exotic-sounding moniker created and adopted as the stage name for English-born William Henry Pratt in order to prevent embarrassment to his elder brothers, who were all prestigious members of His Majesty's diplomatic service. However, to his surprise, his brothers were all supportive and very proud of Karloff's monstrous success. A notoriously hardworking, dedicated, and self-sacrificing actor, Karloff was in 174 films between 1919 and 1971. Nearly 80 of them were prior to his stardom. Karloff credits Whale for ending his nearly 20-year struggle with small roles, saying Whale was the best friend he ever had. And now, just like the film, we'll cook up an ending that's even sweeter than first expected. We'll create a towering inferno of dark chocolatey donuts filled with burnt caramel marshmallows and dark chocolate chips surrounding a flaming, smoky sip of goodness. This is a tower that you'll happily let crumble and burn before destroying and devouring every last morsel. The elaborate sets for The Bride of Frankenstein consume much of the film's budget, which was already higher than projected and taking longer than expected, due to Colin Clive's previous horse riding injury, which is why he's seated or lying down in many scenes, and the physical toll endured by Boris Karloff, including hip and back injuries, combined with the dramatic weight loss and exhaustion from the punishing 62-pound costume, which incidentally enhanced the monster's iconic lumbering and limping gait. Even though Universal was famously frugal for repurposing sets from previous movies, Universal art director Charles D. Hall spent a small fortune to create the dark, towering laboratory entrance to Frankenstein's Gothic castle, which borrowed redressed interiors from the 1931 Dracula sets. Hall was responsible for the look and mood of many Universal movies, including those for Charlie Chaplin, Laurel and Hardy, Dracula, Frankenstein, and The Invisible Man. Many sets and props from the original Frankenstein film were reused for the sequel, but were enhanced and expanded just like the budget. Props designer Kenneth Strickfaden was an electrician turned set designer and electrical special effects wizard who worked uncredited on the original film's impressively realistic laboratory equipment, which included an enormous Tesla coil that could generate and launch gigantic bolts of lightning, as well as the variable traveling arc, which allowed sparks to cycle upward between two metal rods. Strickfaden also served as Karloff's uncredited stunt double during some laboratory scenes, since Strickfaden was the only one who knew how to safely operate the devices. And 40 years later, Mel Brooks sought out Strickfaden, who had many of his screen-used inventions in his garage, and reused much of it, including the variable traveling arc, in his 1974 comedy, Young Frankenstein. Strickfaden's fantastic flashes of light against Hall's moody laboratory set were made even more visually striking through the ingenious skill of cinematographer John Mescal. Whale repeatedly worked with Mescal for his fluid, dreamy, and surreal camera movements, mastery of light and shadow, and ability to work quickly. Mescal's on-set work was remarkably unaffected by his struggle with alcoholism, but Universal made sure Mescal had a safe way to and from work and provided him with a car and driver. Whale obviously knew talent when he saw it or heard it. He already admired an earlier film score of Franz Waxman, and when they met at a Hollywood party, Whale asked Waxman if he'd write a score for a movie in which nothing would be resolved except the ending. Waxman understood the assignment well, writing 3 separate themes for Pretorius, the Monster, and the Bride. And in one 9-hour session, 22 musicians recorded the entire score, in which Whale requested an ending tone to match the powerful explosion so discordant and jarring that it would make moviegoers feel they had experienced the explosion in person. And while the movie did culminate in an explosion, it was the death toll which changed. The famous line, "We belong dead," was originally to be followed by the death of all inside the tower. But just days before the scheduled premiere, Whale was urged by Universal to allow Henry and Elizabeth to live. And if you look closely, Henry could still briefly be spotted in the burning tower in one of the ending shots. So Whale saw the studio's demand as an opportunity to double down on the merciful and compassionate morality of the monster, adding the line, "Go, you live," to which Karloff brilliantly added a single tragic tear. It's an ending even sweeter than originally intended, igniting a deep love and sympathy for a monster, an old flame for whom many of us still carry a torch, in the most tender and sentimental way. Now that our edible creations are complete, it's time to get ready for the festivities with a quick and easy no-sew bride costume and a towering wig, in green, of course, and a few makeup touch-ups. So in the words of the monster himself, let's get to work! For this costume, I had to work fast as the monster is growing more and more impatient to meet his new friend with every moment. That meant I had to use what I had on hand and keep the sewing machine neatly tucked away for this one. So I exhumed an old, oversized, formerly white t-shirt that was freshly buried in the rag bin and harvested it for its usable parts. Severed and hacked away at 2 pairs of white tights to resemble bandages and draped a flowy tunic from fabric used for reverse projections at Halloween. I fastened everything with safety pins, much like those added to the bandages of Elsa Lanchester's costume, made by Vera West, who was Universal's costume and wardrobe magician. West was known for her ability to mysteriously craft a gothic look from contemporary silhouettes that were extremely fashionable in the 1930s. Notably, the gown that was on screen for less than 8 minutes and took 17 women 3 months to create was Lanchester's form-fitting, glittering, and revealing formal gown. It was certainly not historically accurate to what Mary Shelley would have worn at home while casually doing needlework by the fire. But the daring neckline that drove the censors mad, the figure skimming seams paired with swaths of draped tulle, and all of that sparkle helped to emphasize the cheeky dialogue regarding the trio's views towards the traditional ties of marriage, and that they lived more freely than most. Another form-fitting ensemble was the bandage costume, which was so tight Lanchester had to be carried around and necessitated that she be fed through a straw, although she claimed to have purposely drank very little to prevent the need to use the restroom. The bandages were so restrictive that a stand-in for Lanchester screamed and panicked from claustrophobia. Jack Pierce applied the bride's makeup and constructed the iconic shock of hair that was designed by Whale with input from Ernest Thesiger. The bride's look was inspired by Queen Nefertiti, and it was Lanchester's idea to add the white streaks to her own red hair that was styled, formed, and then lacquered in place around a wire cage covered in horsehair. Dressed in all white like a surgeon in an operating room, Jack Pierce ran his makeup room with matching precision. Lanchester arrived at 5:30 a.m. to begin the lengthy transformation of becoming the bride, who was ironically on screen for less than 5 minutes. For Karloff, the process was unlike modern movie makeup, which uses molds and ready-made prosthetics. Pierce started fresh each day, building layers upon layers of cotton and adhesives right on Karloff's face, requiring Karloff to arrive as early as 2:30 a.m. and endure up to 5 hours of makeup application. Not only did Pierce carefully replicate the makeups each day, he also added details to indicate the monster's progression of healing from the burns he suffered at the windmill, showing the monster's hair slowly growing back and the gradual diminishment of scars over time. Then, as torturous as the makeup was to put on, it was even worse coming off. The removal required at least 2 hours of using painful solvents and prying, especially for Karloff, who sometimes slept in the makeup, with his head propped between books to avoid ruining it and to avoid the agony of removal. All of the work and sacrifice that went into creating the Bride of Frankenstein, which Whale thought could never be as good as his first creation, was a monstrous success. Whale brought all of the right talent together, a supreme collaboration, a creation so unique because we can all connect with every character, especially the monsters. A film so unusual that it provokes thought, pushes boundaries, and makes us laugh while still being a little scared. It's an enthralling creation, a masterpiece worth resurrecting and bringing to life time and time again. So there you have it, Friday Night Feast and Fright featuring The Bride of Frankenstein. Be sure to check back every first Friday for more Friday Night Feast and Fright. We're dying to have you for dinner. I loved being your haunted hostess. You're a wonderful guest and you're welcome back always. Farewell until next time. Cheers.